Hey Tyers, Darren here again with another fly tying tutorial. Today we're going to be tackling the Starlite Leech. This is a good leech pattern and you can tie it either as a straight leech or you can add a hot head on this in either orange, pink, or red to represent an egg sucking leech. I tie these in a number of different colors including black with different colored heads, purples, chartreuse, pink, olive, and even a flesh-colored version where I use a white tail, pink body, orange hackle, and a pink egg. So this is a great fly for getting into deep pockets quickly. You want to make sure that you tie this with a lead eye. If you don't need to get down quite as fast, you can use a brass eye on this. It's good for either jigging or just dead drifting with your presentation. Great fly for king salmon, chum, and steelhead on the west coast, even in the Great Lakes. Alright, let's get started. Alright, we'll start off with a fresh hook in the vise. I'm going to tie this one in a purple variation, and I'm going to tie this with the egg sucking version. Okay, so I've got a Tiemco 7999 heavy wire hook. This one's a 1/0, and I'm going to use a Danville flat wax nylon in black. I'm just going to start by tying the eyes on first. So I just want to coat the bend back of this hook with tying thread. Trim that off. This is a 210 Denier thread, so it's pretty thick. I'm just going to come back a little forward here. I'm going to seat my lead dumbbell eye. I'm going to give it a couple wraps from back to front and then come under the hook and then wrap the opposite way. You just want to make sure that while you're wrapping this, you're conscious of how the eyes are sitting on the hook. So with this thread, you can give it quite a bit of torque. So every few wraps, I like to just give it a pull just to make sure that the thread wraps are snug and that the eye isn't going to move too much. Alright, that looks good. If you want to, you can add a little dab of head cement there, but I think we're good. So I'm going to wrap the thread down to the bend of the hook, or just to my tie-in point for my next material, and then I'm going to wrap back almost all the way back to the eyes. Okay, so we're going to tie in a zonker strip. I'm using purple here. So I typically measure this out about a hook length plus a little extra. So what I do is kind of have my tie-in point, and then I'm going to tie down the rest of the material. Just going to trim that off here. This helps add a little bit of bulk to the fly. And I don't really like these squared off tails, so I'm just going to give that a bit of a trim at a 45. Don't know that that matters a whole lot. That's just a personal preference. Right, next we're going to add just a touch of flash to the tail. I've got some pearl crystal flash, and I'm just going to take 2 strands. I'm going to tie this along the length of the tail. Tie it in on the close side. A couple wraps up. I'm going to take the material over to the far side of the hook. then tie it down the opposite side. And just trim that the tail. So now I'm going to take some Estaz. Now I've got some options here. I've also got a purple. This one's from Superfly. You can see the difference in the colors. I'm going to use the Superfly today. It's a little bit denser than the Estaz. And I like this fly to be nice and dense. So I'm just going to pull a few fibers off the core. And I'll tie that in securely. And I'm going to wrap my thread right behind the lead eyes here. Then we're just going to basically wrap this, palmering it forward, trying to keep this as close as possible, making a dent body. And once we get up behind the eye, just going to take that to the top and we'll give that a couple wraps, a couple behind, one or two in front, and another one behind to lock it in place. We'll trim off the excess. Next I'm going to take a piece of Schlappen. This is a purple, and I want this fairly webby. If you use saddle hackle, use something that's fairly webby. And we're just going to create a tie-in point here by pulling these fibers back. You don't want to be too close to the tip because it gets a little bit more fragile. So we'll tie that in. Pull that tip back to lock it in. Trim it. Then we're going to take our scissors and just slide them along the Schlappen there just to help push all the fibers to one side. If some come off, that's not a big deal. And then we're just going to wrap, palmer these fibers back with each wrap so everything's flowing backwards, back over the fly. 3 or 4 wraps should be good depending on the density of the feather. This one's a little thin, so I'm just going to give it 1 extra wrap. Looks good, and we'll tie that off. And again, make sure you've got thread on both sides of that material so it's locked in place. So if you want to make a standard leech pattern, you can go ahead and use purple. But I'd like to do more of an egg sucking leech, so I'm going to use a pink. So I'm using laser dub for this. I'm just going to take out a small pinch of dubbing. And I'm actually going to dub this on the thread. Now, a lot of tyers will use a chenille, like an ultra chenille or a standard rayon chenille here, but I prefer the dubbing. So just start with a couple wraps in behind, and then we'll take this as through a figure 8. Just going to give that a little bit extra dubbing. See, it's fairly thick noodle, and I'm going to brush this out a little bit, so I'm going to add a little bit more. And as this fly gets fished, this pink will pull out even a little bit more, giving it a nice fishy look. Alright, and we'll tie that off at the eye. Add our whip finishes. And make sure you seat that knot so that it doesn't snap off on you. So we'll add some head cement to that as well after we brush this out. So I'm just using my homemade dubbing teaser here. Just give that a few brushes. Brush that backwards. Ouch. Yeah, those hooks are sharp. Right, and there you go. Egg sucking Starlite Leech.